through natural strata of the soil that have been laid down for thousands of years in different coloration. Usually topsoil is very dark because it's very organic. And then the colors underneath are usually evidences of the parent material or the bedrock that has been broken up that makes some of the soil. But you fill that hole back in, you can't put the layers back nice and neat. They mix and they model, and that's what archaeologists call features. So this is mixed modeled soil. You can see the change in the soil color, meaning this is the grave shaft. And it's oriented rectangularly in an east-west orientation, which is a classic Christian burial practice. But note something here. I don't know if you can make it out, but there's another dark stain over here.
Yeah.
And we do know that there were other unmarked graves out there. On one side of Albert was a 37-year-old Euro-American who died, I believe, in a railroad accident. And on the other side of Albert were two young kids. So we had to create a unit of excavation that was fairly narrow because we did not want to disturb those other individuals. So we had to keep a very tight, narrow, with only a very small platform. And you'll see as we get deeper what that starts to look at. But once we get it done, everything gets mapped. Once we got to the point where we saw the stain now coming out, what we then started to do was excavate within the burial feature itself, okay? And using the outer area as a narrow platform in which to work. And you can see as we were getting deeper, we required, and because it was so narrow, we had to require a ladder to get in and out, especially a little guy like me. I don't do too many. In some cases, what we sometimes do is we step. If we have enough room, we could step and come in. We did that when we worked Fletcher Smith's grave, but in this case, we had a road back here. We had people on both sides. We had no other way but getting in and out through a ladder to do the work. But once we found the excavation, the feature, then we started to work within the feature. I also took, toward the ends of the area, soil cores to see how far down the feature stains kept going in anticipation that it was going to be 4 to 6 feet. Overnight, we had people staying at the cemetery. Overnight, we were very concerned about security. And not only did we have people staying overnight, but also they put vault lids over covering the excavation unit so no one can get in. And those you can't get off without a background. But security was an issue whenever we deal with these kind of sites overnight. And the security was well taken care of here at the cemetery. Well, during the whole procedure, because the family was there, it gave me an opportunity. I had gone over with Wendell my methods and to see that they were appropriate in Lakota tradition. But I was able to talk to Marlis and Richard about everything I was doing, my procedures, findings, and so forth. In fact, I remember one time I came out of my ladder, I got out, and there was a reporter there from the New York Times, and she looked at me and she said, "You the one in charge?" And I said, "No, I'm not in charge. That woman over there is in charge, and her father in charge. I'm the laborer. I'm the one that's doing the work, but they're the ones that are in charge." So everything was, we wanted to be approved. But one of the things I shared with them was my concern about soil acidity. The soil, it turns out, that we had tested, I had done soil tests of the acidic levels of the soil, the pH scale, which goes from, 0 is, it goes from 0 to 14. 7 is neutral. Anything less than 7 is acidic. Anything higher than 7 is usually alkaline. Studies have shown that soils with 5.3 or less pH levels have a very poor chance of organic remains to survive. And so when I saw these coming back from the laboratories at ranging from 5.2 to 5.8, I had prepared the family that there's a good chance he's not here. That is to say, he may have already totally disintegrated into the soil. I said, what we can do is, when we find the coffin, because of the top boards in terms of the nails, the bottom boards, we'll have a 3-dimensional model of that coffin with what we have. Kind of put it in a CAD system so that we have to. And I said, I can give you the soils that were once out there. I said, but I was not very confident that there would be remains. But kept my fingers crossed that they would have something to bring home to South Dakota. So the excavation gets deeper and deeper, going down. By this time, we're obviously working with hand tools. Again, the family was there through the process, watching over us. And, you know, I don't need to go into this, but, you know, talk about the burial shaft. Depth measurements were taken with a laser light because we kept getting deeper and deeper. This was a very deep excavation. And, you know, I like this one just because it shows me kind of cramped up. You know, this is kind of I couldn't find too many comfortable positions after a while. But, you know, it's helpful if you're going to be an archaeologist if you're a little guy, because, you know, you get into positions and cramped things, you know, it helps. But anyhow, it was very tight, and again, we couldn't expand any further because of the other burials, and so we just worked and kind of like most archaeological excavations, even though we all, you know, screening the soils becomes very important just as a backup. And then while we were working, I can't remember what day it was, but I think it was what, Wednesday? Thursday? It was Thursday. Okay, Thursday, they asked me to come out of the unit and said that the family wanted to do a ceremony. And I said, okay. And, you know, we all went over, and what they were going to do was something I had no idea, and I think the rest of us had no idea what was coming, but they did what was called a naming ceremony. And they bestowed upon, I think 5 of us, Lakota names. And you can see Mary Jo, who's here, and Bob, Tanya, Christine Rose, all receiving gifts from the family and receiving Lakota names. And it was very emotional. It was a very emotional time for all of us. And, they actually even gave me a Lakota name. And Wendell, if I pronounce it wrong, feel free to correct me. Tepu Wan Washti Okaile. I think it means man who can't hear well. Now, actually, they tell me it means he who finds good. Which is quite. I told them I really appreciate the sentiment, but I probably can't live up to a name like that. But I felt bad because I hadn't found anything yet. Here they give him his name, he who finds good, and I haven't found anything. So, you know, I go right back to work, and I really felt, you know. It's like, gee, I got to find something for these people. I mean, now it's getting personal. But you can see, you know, because of the cramping, in some cases I had to straddle over, not to affect anything, but to actually straddle over the narrow opening. And we just kept working. And you can see the flagging is actually, I'm locating hardware nails. Whenever I found hardware, we flagged it. So literally, again, we'll have a 3-dimensional model of the entire coffin. But what I made a decision to do, because I understood that the family would not, this is going to take a while, but I knew the family couldn't stay for long. So one of the things I decided to do was concentrate my work at one end of the burial. Usually we like to take everything down horizontally, the whole feature. But in this case, I wanted to know as soon as I could whether there was going to be any skeletal remains or not. So I decided to concentrate on the western end. So I had a series of nails that were clearly representing the ends of the end of the coffin. If it's laid out, if he's laid out in a Christian pattern, that is going to be where his head is going to be, because the Christian burial practice traditionally was that you lay on your back in an east-west orientation, head to the west. And the idea is that you lay in the grave on the day of resurrection, Christ will come up out of the sun in the east and draw you from your housing. So go to your old cemeteries in New England. You'll see, bring a compass if you need it. You'll see people are laid out east-west, head to the west. That usually means in New England, when you go to a cemetery and read, here lies Jonathan Edwards, Jonathan's not in front of the stone. Jonathan's actually behind the stone with his feet moving away. And sometimes you can even see a footstone that's smaller. So if he's laid out in a Christian pattern, but I had no idea if he was, this should be where the cranium or the head should be located. So I started to work just that area, just to know whether I was going to get anything or not. And as we worked, you know, we removed it, and I got down further, and I started to hit nails at the bottom of the board. And my heart sank because I knew we were getting to the end. and that I was not finding him or any physical remains of him. But then, with my trowel, I was scraping, and a piece of, I want to say a piece of soil dislodged, about the size of a 50-cent piece. And I saw that there was bone. I saw what would be the forehead, or what's called the frontal bone. And at that moment, I looked at that. He's here. And somebody snapped his picture at that time. So it's kind of a favorite picture of mine because it's you're not going to see me with a bigger grin than that. I'll tell you that. But he was there. You can also see we're switching to surgical gloves in case we were going to use DNA as a source of identification. But it was good. It was a great moment. And the family wasn't here at that time because they, at that time, were, I believe, with Bob and Mary Jo, and I don't know if Wendell was with them, but they went up to meet with the mayor of Danbury at Danbury Hospital and tour the area where Albert had died. And so they weren't even here when this happened, and so we couldn't wait for them to come back so we could tell them what we had found. By the way, there was newspaper coverage, and every time they took a picture of me in the paper, my pants were ripped. And, my wife is so embarrassed. In fact, her boss came to her and said, you know, we pay you enough to pay you good jeans. Hey, that's just the way it is. My students love my jeans. I don't understand it. But anyhow, it was a great moment. It was a great moment because he was there. And at that time, working with Gary.
How deep are you?
It turns out, when the final measurements, he was at 6 feet.
Wow.
And so what ended up happening, I think, is that through time there was a slumping. So while I had a top row of nails, I was getting down now a good 8 inches and not hitting any remains. And I would have expected by that, because the coffin's only about 8 feet. And then I started hitting another set of nails, and I was getting concerned. It turns out those other nails were along the sideboards, but he was slumped down almost so that the bottom nails, he was actually, parts of them were actually below the bottom nails. So it was just some slumping. Gary Aronson from Yale University, who's a forensic and biological anthropologist, was able to assist us and help me with not only the recovery but the identification at this time. And you can see him, and you can see the bones are in very, very poor condition. When we were getting the cranium prepared for the family, right here, excuse me, on the left side, right in the back here, I started to find some fibers. And I fairly recognized those fibers were hair particles. I didn't know they were, buffalo hair, horse hair, or human hair at the time. The hair, and I'm saying to myself, how could hair survive in the soil? It's so acidic, we could hardly have any skeleton remains. How do we get that? And then it became obvious because what we found were 3 copper beads, a copper plate, and a copper pin. Albert was wearing an earring in his left ear. And it was just, whoa. And what it did is just preserve the hair around him. And the forensic work would show that is human hair. So remarkably, what happens is the salts leach into the soil around it, and it neutralizes the soil acidity in that area and allows for enhanced preservation. This blew me away. Also, we found evidence of a shroud and pins. You can see the pin here. This black material is a shroud. We do know from the historic record, the newspaper accounts, that when he was prepared for burial, they removed his traditional Lakota clothing. Supposedly they were going to mail that back to the family. As far as I know, it never arrived to Pine Ridge. But then they wrapped them in a sheet and a shroud. And what we found were evidences of the sheet that preserved because of the pins. And I'll show you another example. And then we found this round little ring, which was kind of interesting too. Here's one of it's a safety pin that was used as a shroud pin. There were also a couple of straight pins, but mostly straight pins, safety pins, as you can see here, to hold it together. And he had a wedding band. And the wedding band, I call it a wedding band, even though I don't think we have any evidence that he was ever married. but we found it on the fourth left finger, exactly where traditional, but I don't know if in Lakota tradition, wedding bands, or maybe at this late date, he would have, or whether he was even married, but there is a clear band or ring on his left finger. Looks like copper brass, yes. At this point, we got to Friday, and the family was having to go back to South Dakota. But they wanted us to remove the cranium at that point so they could do a final ceremony. And so, not showing you pictures of the cranium, but Gary and I are what we did is we pedestaled up and then undermined and very carefully slid onto a wooden platform. There were issues. The interior of the cranium is full of wet soil, and the bone is extremely